Marketing has been changing completely and no one is talking about it. We actually live in an era where marketing is almost like a sport. More people know and understand marketing than ever, mostly because of the internet and content around it for the last few years. Also, this comes with an increase in small business acumen because of things like Shark Tank and all the gurus we know and love. But a lot of the trends that are happening are really hard to put in a snippet. And a lot of the people that make content about this stuff don't really live it. And if they do, aren't on the cutting edge. They're too far removed, or they're too in personal brands or selling courses or they're niche. In this video, I'm gonna walk through the actual trends and extremely important concepts that are not being talked about almost anywhere on the internet. We're gonna talk about visual world building, product is marketing, 10x creative directors, how mainstream AI ads have gone, the clipping era, brand trips, event rollouts and global rollouts, the rise of indie brands on social, and how bigger marketing institutions are beginning to get better now. Why we need to stay on the edge. There'll be campaign examples for all of these. I want this to be both fun to follow and educational if you work in this space. And I promise you there is no marketing content like this on the internet. Let's lock in. So first, I want to talk about the app Aura and this concept of world building. You've heard this a lot of marketing people have co-opted this term, but the Aura app is basically a running app where you can showcase your run with custom graphics and a lot of graphics they curate themselves. And what Zach has done is using AI mostly, has taken pieces of internet culture of all kinds and rapidly implements them into the app. People really want to share Aura and share this absolutely constantly. Whenever they do their runs, they make it so they're much more likely to share their workouts. But each piece is basically a piece of internet ephemera, for lack of a better term, where Zach will grab all of these pieces of culture, from the Drake fonts to adding Call of Duty kill streak graphics, building his own quotes and lore, even recurring characters and things they've talked about to form the story around his app. And what is particularly interesting about this is this app was basically born on X, where he built it in public from his initial concept to prototypes to graphics to beta to launch. Then he brought it over to Instagram, and then people began sharing it and multiplying it. People sharing this app that people have not seen before with all these graphics and things that look familiar. And now characters and through lines and ideas that he's pushing through this gives this new visual building, which is kind of completely different than any rollout or thing that we've seen before in software. But it reminds me a lot of this podcast called the Technology Brothers Podcast, TBPN, if you have not heard of this. So they rolled out with a very strong visual feel. The podcast hosts were in suits, they were in a more formal environment, they were reading tweets printed off on paper. It felt more professional, more real, more put together than what we'd seen prior. And evolved into a live show that mirrors almost exactly what would be on a major news network. But they've now built their brand world by basically having snippets, again, just like a news site, that lives within the things like a new profile pic for a former OpenAI executive, or the world's largest long-range aircraft being delivered, engineers becoming a girl dad. They are using a visual universe of the way they present themselves, the graphics of how they present their episodes, to the promotions that move out around it, to treat the content and the brand of their content like a modern news network, to position against kind of more traditional technology podcasts and all-in and antiquated stuff like that, and tell an interesting visually dynamic story. And what's important here for all marketers to recognize is the playbook has very much changed about how much media you can turn out, how constant you can keep the conversation, and the network effects that happen when people believe in it and have a toolkit they can adopt. Much like we see things like Wimbledon or the US Open or people dropping thousands of pieces of content, our understanding fundamentally of velocity in marketing, how much can get covered, how much content you can put out. TBPN is live for hours every single day. And they evolved to there from a podcast within months. And what you should be covering and the role of what media looks like. And I bring up this media role because it's important for brands too. More and more now you see brands hiring for media roles, whether that's coaching employees to make content, ghostwriting for the founders, or opening up whole media arms. A16Z is a whole media arm coming together. Because they're realizing that a lot of lifestyle journalism and a lot of industry coverage people want to listen to no longer comes from journalism. There's a stark divide between wanting to read that, the terribleness of the UX on those sites, and the unqualified nature of most of the people that write for those publications, versus having that happen by people that actually operate in it with a more straightforward relationship of if a brand gives you good content, maybe you'll want to buy their products. You actually know the motivations there versus darker, more complicated motivations that come from the traditional journalist ecosystem. And this goes for marketing the same way. People much rather consume things from the marketing creator ecosystem, people curating those news sources. Because Adweek or Ad Age seems brutally out of touch. They can't even make their own good content. Why would you listen to them about what content is? and knowing the people that they cover most often in agencies are the same people sponsoring these events or that, and no idea what the real economics or implications of the relationship look like. But along with world building, we are in the product as marketing era. So Skims released this head wrap. They had Anthony Hopkins relive his Silence of the Lambs character as part of its debut. And this is an example of something that maybe they'll sell a bunch of units, maybe this will be a success. I don't think so. I doubt this will even work. But it is purely marketing inside the product roadmap. This has worked for a while. You would see brands release concept products or release products that were more meant for virality. But now, people that were on it early, this is now built in. This is in the product development meetings. This is in the release schedule. They're years into it. It's become adopted. That's an important concept to consider. Because the product development cycle takes time, it took time to actually activate on this as a strategy. So if someone's a couple cycles ahead, they're already so much better at it than others. And mainstream companies get it too. This is Progresso. They made real soup drops. That's purely a marketing stuff. This is purely marketing, but they made them, they're real, and people could buy them. And this now happens in the mainstream. For instance, this Gustav Westman IKEA collaboration featured this meatball tray that, again, you may have, you're rarely going to use, is there for virality. There's been more conversation around this meatball tray than the collaboration itself, and that drives then demand for the collaboration. That's always been the point of these viral items, is to drive conversation about the topic to then get people to go consume more normal stuff because they don't really need a meatball tray. But while they looked at the page, maybe they saw something they actually do need. This concept has gone from cool idea to built into serious companies. IKEA, Skims, Progresso is in their roadmap. This is cemented. So this is something that if you have a serious brand, should be certainly thinking about and in the midst of. And the key thing to solve is how do the marketing teams and product teams work together to find the MOQs, get ahead, develop the viral item, make it both interesting enough and functional enough it may want to actually work for your customer, forecast it, act on it, and make it a recurring part of what you build together. And this is one thing I want to call out. If you do not have a social media team member working with your product team, we're in the packaging meetings. You need people that understand how things move online because those little changes, those tweaks, the color schemes, the postability of anything makes a massive difference in 2025. One of the related concepts I want to talk about is this idea of the 10x creative director. I talk a lot to people about why Skims is on top because everyone will assume it's the Kardashians, and certainly that's part of it. But they also have an example of what I call a 10x creative director. And this is Nadia Lee Cohen. She's probably a 100x creative director. That's a separate topic. But basically this idea that whoever's taking the photos and the videos is good enough to propel the brand into culture. And she's a perfect example of this. Her shooting the Cavalli Skims campaign is the difference between it being okay and it being innately viral. You can tell from every image it's one of her images. Medium format film look is crushing it. She has her trademarks. They care about the presentation. She is doing this at a level of pure excellence from her involvement, and the added her social media and her 1 million followers and her cult around what she's put together is a massive multiplier for that brand. That's not for everybody. And I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the level below this because there's a whole generation, mostly women, who are propelling these modern brands forward by thinking like this. So you've heard me talk a lot about David Bar. This woman, Sarah, is the creative director there. You're like, creative director of a protein bar. Like, what does that even mean? Why would they need that? But David is an extremely aesthetically driven brand, right? That gold wrapper reminds you of a power bar from back in the day, but has that Greek refinement to it, playing into all the aesthetic tropes that we know and just makes it seem immediately appealing. They got aesthetics from the start. But they're also leaning into conceptual marketing, product as marketing. They launched cod. This has been talked about to death, but to give you a quick recap, they launched basically a fish bar with the emphasis that we care so much about protein and the macro content of these products that we make that we're going to give you the highest source. It's basically a stunt that they put out to prove that the only thing that is as protein dense as eating a David bar is a literal brick of cod that you could actually purchase. But the campaign to release that was immaculately creative directed by this woman and her associated crew, but it presented the brand with the autist triggering silverware, a creative directed look and feel, and an actual campaign with the rollout for a CPG brand that traditionally would do absolutely nothing like this. It's like a fashion rollout. And then continue to actually complete a set of aesthetic imagery that really tells the brand story in a compelling and unique way. What she is doing for this brand from an aesthetic and a campaign angle, even in just these two things we're talking about, in this brand's arc as a new brand, is a 10x multiplier on how it will be regarded in space over time if it continues. And the same goes for people inside the beauty world. So this woman works with a ton of beauty campaigns and basically is responsible for kind of artful and interesting teaser and campaign content. She has her own trademark style, these kind of compilations of images and behind the scenes and art coming together. But I have seen her do campaigns for like a dozen major beauty brands, all of whom are kind of competitive with each other, but they don't care as long as they can get their hands on some of her work to actually promote what they're working on. This is House Labs, next to Fleur, next to Salt & Stone, next to Dior Beauty, next to Fenty Skin, next to NARS, next to Rhode. All of those brands compete with each other. Salt & Stone a little bit on the side. But this is really good content. I'm not saying it's ultra viral, but it is good, artful, brand building, creative content that she has a knack for. It's good as another ad asset that you can be testing inside the campaign. But people who have this skill set, and I show her and all the brands she's doing because that shows you the demand for creative level content has any level of resonance. Again, none of this is even ultra viral or even semi-viral. It is base hits that are good, but they are brand builders by the nature of the visuals and who they appeal to and why. And the fact that she's behind it, so you have an if you know aspect as well. And there's a whole cottage industry of these people out there that can be multipliers for brands, musical artists. I believe I found Sandy because she was doing art direction for K-pop groups that were standing out. But then all of a sudden she's doing this like sexualized doll Supreme campaign. There are people out here who can move the visual zeitgeist. They are in extremely high demand. They're often shooting a lot of these things themselves, or at least know the access to the crews to be able to do it. And they are pulling the strings of the tasteful angles inside of social media. And with the exception of Nadia Lee Cohen there, none of those are household names. All right, so as many of you know, I launched a new domain the other week. I bought creativedirector.net. And I put together a landing page in Framer and gave you a bit of a tutorial about how I chose the template and how quick it was for me to put it together. But I want to highlight a new feature Framer has released that makes editing websites super easy for you or your team. So if you are on any live Framer site the way I am on here, you'll notice this little edit button on the left. So you can actually just click edit, and this is the live site. As long as I'm logged in Framer on this live site, I can edit any of the stuff you see here. So you'll see I can roll over any of the sections it allows me to change. And so I'm going to update this because I am going to do my next webinar on October 22nd. So I'm just going to go in here and literally change it to October 22nd. And here I clicked this image. I can change the type. I can swap it out. Same thing here. Even with the form, I could change my form ID with ConvertKit, all without even going into an edit. And I click finish editing and it is just live. So if you are a designer who is making sites that your clients are going to update, you now have an easy way to tutorial them having to do it without even having to touch an editor. Or if you have a team, you've been editing your own site and you want to update it with a VA or have someone who's not as design savvy do it, you can lock this in here. And it's just one of the many reasons why I love to choose Framer for portfolio sites and business sites. So an interesting time to be in the web design ecosystem with all these tools coming out. You can learn more about Framer and get started with the link that I have in the description. Let's get back to it. But moving over into the AI ad world, and you don't hear me talk a ton about AI on this channel. I think a lot of its applications people spend a waste a lot of time pursuing. But the one that has been the most dramatic is what happened specifically with this guy, PJ Asatura, who I've talked to, super nice guy, super talented. He's working on a campaign on a project I have at work. But he created this Kalshi campaign. Now, obviously, you will see things like sports betting and gambling and stuff be on the fringes of adoption of a lot of marketing. But they created these basically like almost hype reel marketing style videos where they were able to use AI for all the clips and kind of create these otherworldly appealing campaigns. But Kalshi did it. They put this together in 2 days. It is on television. It went viral and shows you that the fringe conversation that creatives are having about, oh, AI or not AI, or does the consumer like it, or should we allow these tools? Those conversation is already over. The watershed has already broken. This is already more popular than almost any creative asset created by purely a human, by an artist, has been replaced by one ad for a AG1 competitor, done by a handful of people in days. And so it's hard to present the implications of that or even just participate in the argument. Participating in that argument is a waste of time. The result is already here. It is already epic, and resisting it is futile. Instead, what you need to be doing is understanding how you can effectively use something like that to tell your story, to say, maybe I don't want to worry about consistent characters or this or that. I want to be able to take ideas from a brain and generate them extremely fast in a compelling way to tell stories that invoke emotion in a way that make content travel. But moving back one notch, touching on David one more time. They're an example of what I call a USP to TikTok Shop pipeline. TikTok Shop is still vastly misunderstood. I've spent an ungodly amount of time the last 6 months trying to convince some of the brands I work with to go further in on this. is a hard conversation, is a thing people do not understand, is not native to a lot of folks. Retail is terrified of it. So if you're also in retail, they don't want to be competing against it. It is complicated and misunderstood. But if you have a strong USP, unique selling proposition, the things that sell your products, TikTok Shop is a heavyweight battering ram to get your brand into the world. David being a perfect example, ultimate example of a USP. Their macro is better than any macro in any protein bar you can possibly buy. You get more protein for less calories with very little sugar. That is the requirements. Every single person who buys protein bars looks at that, goes, does it taste okay? And that is the vetting process. And they have won that battle scientifically. And that allows them to hammer TikTok Shop ads, because the best TikTok Shop ads go unique selling proposition, hammer it in, and then add a couple vehicles on that. This deal is leaving soon. Is this worth the money? Here's the results from doing X and Y. There's a lot of proven viral factors, but it all comes down to, are there rock solid USPs? Now, other protein bars have noticed this. One that I like and am a consumer of, called Prima, have basically been like, hey, we are positioning very different than David. David's like, you're gonna get all these macros. Prima's like, you're gonna get all natural, no seed oils, no weird stuff. This is like purely beef tallow and honey and all that. You want something that is completely unprocessed. This tastes good and the macros are aight. And I respect it. Do I wish it had 90% less sugar and I'd deal with the taste with that? Yes, but I get the American palate.
Peanut butter cup, Doritos, sausage, car panini. And let's crack a Cadbury egg over the whole thing.
But they have a USP for that. You want an all-natural thing. It's positioned against this other popular thing and all these other brands in the market. You can read every ingredient and understand what it is. That's a rock-solid USP for TikTok Shop, and they're blowing up from it. If you're in this algorithm, you've probably seen sour berry puff, and someone else saying, you know what? Do you not care about any of that shit? And you just want something that tastes completely outrageous and disgusting, and it gets the job done? Here's sour berry puff, right? But it's just worth noting, if you have USPs, actual unique selling points to the product, the scalability of that on TikTok Shop, and the ability to say, I give an affiliate a percent. I give them 20%, 30%, whatever it is of a sale. And that's all that I give. And I send out product. And I have an economic model that means that whenever the posts are made about it, I pay off that commission, I fulfill the order, and I still make any amount of money. Any amount of money is a win. And I can get as much of that out of the ecosystem as I desire. That is a mathematically driven business scaling system with which the economics are intrinsically better than just purely running ads and having to force more creative into it. Plus, with GMV Max and things like that in TikTok Shop, you can steamroll, you can add fuel to the fire, push a lot more of those ads out there to actually boost that on your own as well, and build a machine these brands are actively doing. What I love most about it is you can explain it to the finance team as a quantifiable machine. It's a perfect merger of operations, marketing, product, and finance from which like giant companies can be born. Fired up, not gonna lie.
Just do it!
Moving over to the dark web and WAP and clipping and our boy TJR. So first, if you're not familiar with the concept of clipping, this has gone pretty mainstream now. Most of you who are consumers of content get it, but it's this idea that people are being paid on a platform called WAP, which is a facilitator of paying people for things on the internet, and absolute legends in their own right. That's a separate video. But basically, a person or a brand can set up a WAP, give access to a big library of footage, and say, clip this footage into, like basically, I mean clipping, edit this footage into things that will perform on the internet within these parameters. Some people have no parameters, and do whatever you want. Make it as risque as you'd like it to be. Some people have more brand standards, and we will pay you a bounty by its performance. So basically, we've now moved from having to quantify views for sales before views being worth something. We will pay you X amount of dollars per 1,000 views of things you clip from this. Good editors sometimes get put on hiring and they move out of the WAP ecosystem entirely. And you just pay them to actually work for you. That's what a lot of gurus have. And they'll have a team of assistant, like other people that supplement that within the WAP. Or it's all done through there. There'll be bounties to say, oh, you know what? This brand has a good content library and they're paying $8 per 1,000 views or whatever. It's pretty high. And they will move around to find the right balance of, can I make the content go and am I getting paid enough for it? And this came to the forefront because of TJR, trading course seller, influencer, bought a $3.5 million hypercar and crossed over into the mainstream. So he went to Monterey Car Week, where a lot of the other rich car people are, was featured in a lot of content and got people like my lawyer being like, do you know this kid? Because it's on his TikTok timeline, crossing over because of the cost of the car. When you access TJR, you see the car, you see the first video, you are pulled into the TJR clipping ecosystem. TikTok recognizes this and they show you 14,000 other accounts of TJR doing all kinds of stuff. And then you see a Brez video, then you're in the Brez algorithm, and all of a sudden you are lost in the clipping nature of TikTok. And for the first time, many people have seen this before with other personalities. If you're a younger consumer, but if you're an older consumer, the hypercar was the first entry point into this world for a lot of people on TikTok. And this is still something brands don't have figured out, right? Their libraries aren't compelling enough to actually clip. They don't know who bounty these are. They don't know how to recruit. They're not putting this together. That is where the alpha is. I, every single day, as a person with a pretty large personal brand on the internet, regret I am not going harder at clipping, but there's like 2 or 3 things that are higher priority on the list I have to get done. I will not let myself get shiny object syndrome with WAP for any longer. I will get there when I get there. But it is a thing I think about absolutely constantly. But this is something that, again, is quantified now, the value of making your content move. There is an active, basically, market for that on the internet, and one that you can participate in with an infrastructure that is on the fringe, and that's only going to get more mainstream because it is literally driving big business. But moving on into a totally different world, let's talk about brand trips. I like to call this one from Graza. This is an influencer on the Graza trip. You know Graza, they make olive oil. What are they doing? Doing brand trips to the US Open with Hand Me the Fork participating. Shout out Hand Me the Fork. But again, to the point of how the algorithms work, if you follow an influencer on a trip and they're interacting with a brand, it begins to show you other people that were on that same trip and shows you that brand again. The algorithms are good at piecing those things together. So when you get a lot of influencers or people in one place, and also you attach it to a thing that has its own algorithm or its own things being generated, like the US Open, all of a sudden you get a content opportunity. And the interesting nature of the content, is there a competition? Is there what's happening inside of it? Is there any virality there? Multiplied by the event, multiplied by the people that are there, gives you a total available viral moment that you can have. And Graza seems to be going very in on the event strategy. They're following this up with a Grazaverse, one-day only tasting experience to celebrate their glass bottles, with a surrealist dinner party and art show, which I'm sure will be a social optimized experience in itself. But related, this is now a brand highlight technique, right? Hotel lobby candles did this. They basically got influencers on a PJ, not even a PJ, like on basically a small plane that resembles a private jet, to the Hamptons, and they invited a bunch of influencers in and on that trip. A bunch of branded stuff inside of it, and they got a ton of content and coverage, because you know what happens when you invite influencers on a private jet? They shoot a ton of content and want to show it off as much as they can. And they followed this up with a boat trip and a bunch of other stuff for this weekend thing. Look, this is a candle brand. But then you look at, how hard is it for a candle brand to stand out? You know how many candle brands there are out there? You have to be doing something interesting. So they put together whatever this excursion costs. Let's say it cost $90,000 to do everything. And this is a private jet from New York to the Hamptons. So it was like a 15-minute flight. Probably wasn't even that expensive for that portion of it, but they had this whole trip and experience planned out. Multiplied their influencer efforts tenfold by putting it inside of this context. And at the same time, we had a similar thing happen with Waterboy. Waterboy did a brand trip, invited a bunch of their customers, invited a bunch of influencers, and then got a lot of conversation around their brand. Their social media manager was getting flack. They were getting flack as an electrolytes or recovery brand because everyone was hungover. The trip didn't quite do so well, but all of a sudden, 1 million more people than normally would have thought about knew about Waterboy. And this is because of the viral multiplier of these brand trips. People are like, no one wants to see influencers doing this anymore. Great, yeah, they probably want to see influencers and customers. But you know what? If it's entertaining, they're going to watch it. And it works, because again, the multiplier of virality, I can't speak to this enough. If you have a brand and a good social media, or you are an influencer with a good social media, and you begin to multiply that by 6 or 8 collaborators that are frequent, and you interact with each other's algorithms, the crossover and how that works is like a radical positive. It works extremely well in generating more interest for the halo. And then again, you cross that over with Summer in the Hamptons, the US Open, other cultural events with their own algorithms. It is a shockingly powerful tool that's kind of hard to describe. Cozy Earth did this with what was called the Bedrock Challenge. They made up their own challenge. They invited influencers. They made a ton of content. My God, this has 530,000 likes and 105,000 shares. And again, all these people you see here have their own social followings. This is not one video. This is one of 100 videos that's on their account about it. By participating in a piece of culture, in a moment, and putting TV on that has more impact than any ad ever could. I don't know how much this cost them. Let's say this was a $150,000 effort. They have paid this back. There's no $150,000 ad campaign you could run that was as effective as the Bedrock Challenge. And because I've been kind of going over time here, I'm going to jump to one of the last ones I had on my list. And this is the rise of the independent brand and their story in particular. Bad Hombres, a brand who I love on social media, they tell their story. Hank quit his job to start a frozen bean and cheese burrito company. And they tell that through vlogs, they tell it on carousels, they tell it again and again. They participate in collaborations. And they have succeeded and got a 100,000 follower business that sells out of burritos all the time by telling their story on social media in a completely organic fashion. By mastering what people want to see and narrative and putting it out there with basically nothing else behind it. But they're not the only ones. This is a storytelling trend that continues. I want to call it Nitro Bar as another example often used. Coffee shop that uses the personalities they have and idea-based storytelling. How we're going to make this drink, how we'd make a drink if Lana Del Rey came to our store. Using conceptual, engaging content to put themselves on the map with social media. It is lo-fi, it is narrative-driven. They show the drinks, they talk about the drinks, they talk about concepts. Cheese Store of Beverly Hills, another one, shout out my boy Greg who works with them, where they literally show customer interactions inside the store with what cheese they're buying and then talk through the cheeses and cutting the cheeses and things in the store of all just high-end cheese. They are just telling a myriad of stories of everyday life inside there, filming customer interaction after customer interaction. But his everyday life on iPhone of the personalities in the business that stands out better than any corporate account that is spending God knows what with social agencies and traditional agencies to try and do something with their marketing that can be done with 1 to 2 people in their phone. So anyway, it's just really important to understand where these things are at, how powerful these strategies are. All the things that I've outlined here are multipliers. If you just continue to work by their existing playbook, you're just gonna be left behind. It fires me up to talk about this because I go and I'm like, man, the more I talk through it, like I'm in conversations where I'm trying to convince people to do some of these things, or I'm in conversations where we're actually pedal to the metal on some of them. And all I wanna do is just go hammer it. And I'm gonna take 30 minutes out of my night to go talk to you about it, to try and get other people fired up about it. But this is happening in real time. If you have the ability to take advantage of it, you can be ahead of the game. The things they're telling you to focus on, the things that your agency is telling you to do, whoever you've paid, what your school is at, it's antiquated, it's fucking bad. They do not understand. You can live in this world of like complete abundance of creative concepts, creative execution, and the power of social media. And I highly encourage you to. Anyway, thank y'all so much for watching and letting me be fired up about this. Until next time.